Hey guys, this is the last podcast from Miss Spect on the elements of art and principles of design. Today we are focusing on one of our last principles of design, which is space. And the main thing I want you to remember about space is that it has nothing to do, when you're talking about art and the principles of design, has nothing to do with planets and stars and solar systems and spaceships, okay? When we talk about space, we talk about creating a believable sense of space in an artwork, making it feel like the viewer, you as the viewer, can literally jump into an artwork. When an artist has successfully created a sense of space, it invites the audience and the viewer to interact and to feel like they can be a part of the artwork itself. Creating a believable sense of space is a sign of good technique, shows that someone has studied and practiced and has the skill to create that believable sense of space, and that they have good observational skills, because the more you see around you, the more you study how things look around you, the easier it is to create a believable sense of space, even if you're drawing from your imagination. As I was just saying, even if the scene is fictitious, the sense of space can still be believable. Here's an artwork that does not have a believable sense of space. And if an artwork does not have a believable sense of space, it's not always necessarily a bad thing. I'm sure you're not necessarily looking at this artwork and saying, wow, it's magnificent, but many times an artwork that doesn't have a believable sense of space is done that way on purpose. It's to add to the overall style and just the style in general that the artist wants to portray. And sometimes, many times, it's because of a lack of experience on the artist's part, because they're untrained, because they've never learned how to create that believable sense of space. As you'll see, as you begin looking at art history movements throughout history, you'll see that the ancient Egyptians were notorious, even though they were some of the first people in the first civilization to create visual art forms and visual records of the things that were happening and things that were important in stories. They did their best to create a believable sense of space and to create realistic scenes, but it wasn't quite right. Still doesn't look exactly like it would look in real life. So here we have an artwork. You can still tell what's going on, you can tell what it's about, but there's no believable sense of space. These people are floating up in the sky. It's hard to tell between these three men on the crosses which of them is supposed to be closest to me as the viewer. I don't feel like I could jump in there and walk around. If I did, I'd probably fall over because it just looks really kind of funky and wacky. However, here we have a very clear and believable sense of space. Now, I'm not saying this is a believable artwork, because obviously when you walk outside, it doesn't look like it's raining men like it does in this painting. Whoops, go back, sorry about that. It doesn't look like it's raining men. It doesn't look like these people are just kind of floating and walking in mid-air. That's not something that we would actually see in real life, but even though it is a fictitious scene, the artist has created a believable sense of space. We can still tell which of the men, which would be these right here, are closest to us as the viewer, and which of them are further away, all these smaller ones in the background. We can tell where the men are in relationship to the building. Some of them are behind the building, some of them are floating in front of the building, and even though it's a fictitious, dreamlike scene, you and I still feel like we could be a part of that we could be walking around and floating with these men in this fictitious scene. Now, there are lots of different ways to create a believable sense of space in an artwork, but there are three that I want you to specifically remember, the three most immediate ways to create a sense of space in an artwork. First one is with size. Based on what actually happens in real life, the objects that are closest to us, for example, this teacup and all of the plates that it's sitting on, are going to be the largest of any of the rest of the objects in the picture. So just by making an object bigger automatically makes the viewer believe that it is closer to them and that it is the closest object to them in the picture plane. The medium-sized cup and saucer and plate is in the middle ground, and then the smallest one is all the way back here. in the background. So just varying up the size, making the largest objects the ones that are in the foreground, smallest objects are the ones that are in the background. That creates a pretty immediate sense of space. Layering is also another one, and this is one that a lot of times goes hand in hand with size. Many times when an artist has created a believable sense of space, they've used more than one of these techniques that I'm teaching you guys today. But layering is also another immediate one. Layering obviously meaning that part of one object is blocking the viewer's view of the object behind it. So his little arm is blocking our view of his leg, his little hand is blocking our view of his foot, his head and body is blocking our view of his body, etc., etc. So by layering objects on top of each other so that one object blocks our view of another object, makes it very, very apparent right off the bat which of those objects is closer to you as the viewer and which one is further away in the picture plane. And the last one I want you guys to remember may seem kind of odd and may not seem as obvious as the last two, but it is a technique that artists use very often because it is something that we see in real life. This is value, using value to create that sense of space. Remember, value is the lightness or darkness of an object. And in real life, because of a phenomenon known as atmospheric perspective, the objects that are closest to you, such as these mountains that we see here, are going to be the darkest and most saturated objects in the picture. As the objects get further away, they get a little bit lighter, and they also get a little bit less saturated. We don't see as much detail, the color isn't as sharp, and the objects actually get lighter as they move away from you as the viewer. And the reason this happens in real life, and the reason they call it atmospheric perspective, is because in the atmosphere there's lots of stuff going on. You know, there's different gases that are floating around in the atmosphere, there are dust particles, pollen, precipitation in the air, you know, humidity, things like that, that are just kind of floating around in the air. And we don't see it, and we don't recognize it because those dust molecules and the pollen molecules and the humidity in the air, and the gases in the air are so small and so microscopic that we can't see them with the naked eye. But as they kind of come together and as they get denser and denser, we can see them, or at least we can see a difference in color and detail. So these objects, these mountain ranges that are closest to us, are still pretty detailed and still pretty dark and saturated because there's not a whole lot of atmosphere and all that stuff that's in the atmosphere between where we're standing as the viewer and where those mountain ranges begin. However, this mountain range is another mile away from us. So now there's going to be even more stuff in the air between where you're standing and where that mountain range begins. That's why it looks lighter and less detailed. And then, of course, this mountain range is yet another 2 or 3 miles away. And so there's going to be 2 or 3 more times as much stuff in the atmosphere, and that's why we get an even vaguer, softer view of that mountain range, because there's more stuff in the air between where we're standing and where that mountain range begins. I don't expect you to remember all the science behind atmospheric perspective. I just want you to remember that as a general rule of thumb, as you look through artworks and future assignments, that an artist has created a believable sense of space when they make the objects closest to the viewer appear darker, more saturated, more detailed, and making objects get lighter in value and less detailed the further away they are from the viewer. 3 really simple, immediate, tried and true ways to create a believable sense of space in an artwork. Just remember, don't make that mistake that when you see an artwork that has planets and stars in it, that you automatically think it's an example of space. Because here, when we talk about the principles of design, we're talking about creating a believable sense of space that makes the viewer feel like they can jump in and take part in whatever's happening in the picture plane. Hopefully that makes sense. You got more information in your book if you need it, but this is one of those that's pretty easy to pick out. It may just be a little bit harder to express how the artist created the believable sense of space. But study it, go over it time and time again, eventually you'll get it.